so much work. So before we go into the beautiful and very intense day of Purim, and definitely this year it's very intense because it comes out with Shabbat, we have the joy, and I am so proud of our students. We're going to hear from the Morot LaHalacha today. The Morot LaHalacha program is a program that Rabbanit Oshra started for women learning halacha. Our students learn in the first program for 2 years, Nida issues and family cycle, and then continue on to learning Shabbat. And our third, we have a third program now of Isur Veter. I'm Batya Kraus. I teach in the Nida program. I am very, very happy to introduce Oshra Koren. Oshra, as you know, is the head of Matan and the total visionary of Matano Sharon, and a total visionary in everything that has to do with women's role in community. I hope we all enjoy our evening. Thank you for coming.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you, Rabbanit Batya. Rabbanit Batya is the mentor and the teacher in the program. She teaches Taharat HaMishpacha. She's been with the program for the past 5 years when we started the Morot LaHalacha program. And she is a Talmidat Chachamim in her own right. Thank you, Batya, for introduction. And you spoke about Esther. I want to mention Esther. Everybody loves the story of Esther. I mean, it's a pretty much happy ending of Megillat Esther, לעילוי, הייתה אורה ושמחה. But I want to tell you the most, I think, significant pasuk, which is the turning point of Megillat Esther, is when Mordechai turns to Esther, when she's hesitant and afraid to go to the king, to Achashverosh, and he turns to her and he says to her, Im lo le'et kazot higat lamalchut. If not for this moment, you have become a queen, you have become royalty. And he's saying to her, don't you understand? This is your moment. You have the opportunity to decide, are you going to change history? Are you going to save the Jewish people? And what Mordechai is telling her, Esther, what do you think? From all of the beautiful maidens of Persia, you think Stam, you are by chance the one that is chosen? Don't you understand that you are chosen for a purpose, that this is your mission? This is your shlichut. Mordechai says his approach is every man and every woman has a mission, has a calling, has a shlichut. And Esther, this is your moment. And when he says that to her, Vatilbash Esther Malchut. She wears royalty. She rises to the occasion and decides, okay, this is the turning point. I have to do it. This is my mission. You know, Rav Soloveitchik says in his essay on shlichut, Rav Soloveitchik says, every human being, man or woman that are born, they are born with the notion that they have a calling. They have a shlichut. And the fact that a person is born in a certain time, a certain place, in a certain era, that is the essence of his shlichut, of his mission. Now we have such a privilege, such an obligation that we were born in this time, in these times where the gates of the Beit Midrash, all of the books of Torah are open in front of us. And our shlichut is, our obligation, our zchut is to pass on that light of Torah to our families, to our friends, to our communities, to Am Yisrael, and to the whole world, to light the light of Torah. And that is our mission, that is shlichut, and we have to have such hakarat hatov to Kadosh Baruch Hu that we were born in this generation that enables women to come closer to Torah Hashem and spread the light of the Torah. And as Batya has mentioned, we have this zchut that we have these amazing scholars in Matano Sharon, women that dedicate their time, their energy, and their passion to learning Torah, learning halacha in the deepest way, in order to make Torah and make halacha accessible to women and men as well. And we are very proud of these women who are growing in Torah and spreading Torah, the light of Torah to the world. It really, I feel like this generation is unbelievable. And it's, in times of darkness, times of Purim, that was darkness, in times of now, which we have difficulties, I wish to focus on the light of these women that have such love of Torah and are willing to give so much of their depth of Torah to all of us. And we are very proud of the Morot Halacha program, which is a program for spiritual and halachic leadership in the community. And I'm really looking forward to hearing each and every one of these amazing women here in our program. We have a lot of nachat and batya. I'd like to pass the sharvit, how do you say that in English? The scepter, back to you, dear Rabbanit Batya. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. Enjoy the evening.
I am so proud to present Keren Miller-Jackson. Keren is going to talk about Matanoth Evionim. It's the whole idea of Matanoth Evionim is an idea that we give from ourselves and we're happier and better person for giving. As children, many times we learn how to get. We get our education, we get taken care of by our parents. The older we get, the more we understand that real simcha and real meaning comes from giving and not getting. Keren has a master's degree in Talmud, and she's learned in many Batei Midrash. She's a graduate of our first Morot LaHalacha program. She is very involved with Kolech, the feminist religious movement in Israel, and we're very, very proud to have her present to us today. Keren.
Thank you so much, Rabbanit Batya. It's really an honor to be here, and it's an opportunity to say in front of this wonderful, tremendous audience, thank you to Rabbanit Oshra Keren for dreaming up such a beautiful program and to creating such an amazing faculty to train us, among which is Rabbanit Batya, who has taught me so much. And it's really just so wonderful to be here with everyone. And welcome to all of our participants this evening. So we're going to be talking about the different Mitzvot of Purim. And the mitzvah which I am talking to you about this evening is the mitzvah of Matanoth Evionim, giving to the poor, giving gifts to the poor. Now we have, of course, in Judaism, a mitzvah of tzedakah, we give charity. What is unique and different, and what is special? What is the special flavor of this mitzvah on Purim, of Matanoth Evionim? So that is what we're going to look at tonight. We're just going to look at a few sources and try and get to a deeper meaning of this mitzvah. In particular, I think this year, Matanoth Evionim takes on greater meaning and greater purpose, particularly because some of us might be able to get to a small Megillah reading, maybe we won't be able to, and we certainly won't be doing the same sort of feasts and Sudot and Mishloach Manot at the same, hopefully we're doing more than last year, but we're still somewhat limited. And so this is one mitzvah which perhaps if we're limited in some of the other things we can do, we can maximize this mitzvah, and we'll see the beauty of maximizing this mitzvah. So I'm just going to share my sources with you, and then we'll be able to study together. So Matanoth Evionim. Where is the source of Matanoth Evionim? Megillat Esther tells us explicitly, it's mentioned explicitly in the Megillah. At the end of the Megillah, Mordechai sends a letter to all of the Yehudim, and he says we're going to commemorate this holiday. And one of the ways we commemorate this holiday, as we see, is that we see in Esther chapter 9, verse 22, that Ke'amim asher nachu behem haYehudim, these days which the Jews enjoyed relief from their enemies, etc., etc., they were told to observe it, okay, with days of feasting, mi'agon l'simcha, u'mi'ever le'yom tov, la'asot otam yemei mishteh v'simcha. Okay, so we're turning our unhappiness into happiness, the sadness into merrymaking. And one of the ways we do this is sending gifts, which I won't be talking about, mishloach manot, ish l're'ehu, Matanoth Evionim. And we see that in the verses, these two mitzvot are related to each other, but we see that we are giving gifts to our friends, Matanoth Evionim, and presents to the poor. And so it's mentioned explicitly in the Megillah itself. Of course, we have many words in the Torah and in Judaism for the poor. We have several different words. One of the words is Evion. And what is the nature of this particular word, which the Megillah chooses to use, Matanoth Evionim? Rashi explains when it is used earlier in the book of Devarim. There, when the word Evion is used, Rashi explains that an Evion is not just a typical poor person. It is someone who is really poor. Dal me'ani, poorer than poor. Ulashon Evion shehu ta'ev l'kol davar. The language of Evion comes from ta'ev, someone who longs for everything, who really lacks. We're talking about someone really poor. And so this is someone in particular. While we are celebrating, we are going to be mindful of those who are in need, and particularly those who are very much in need. So this gives us the basis, the source of where this comes from. And now let's understand a little more what it means. What is the purpose of giving to specifically Matanoth Evionim? So when we look at some of the Talmudic sources, we'll see a little bit more of a filling in of the picture of what this mitzvah is about. So the Gemara in Bava Metzia, interestingly, this mitzvah is also talked about in Tractate Megillah. And there, sorry, I'm pausing for a moment to just tell you that in Tractate Megillah, it learns from the verse which says that we give mishloach manot, ish l're'ehu, one to his friend. And there the Megillah teaches, just as we have to give 2 mishloach manot, we should also give gifts to 2 poor people, not 1, but 2. Keep that in mind. We're going to get back to that later. Now we see that in Bava Metzia, the Gemara contains a machloket, a debate about what one may do, what the poor person may do with the money he or she receives on Purim. And the Gemara says, Detanya, Magvat Purim lePurim. The Purim collection is meant for Purim, meaning that ideally the poor person should use it on Purim for their su'udah, so that they can enjoy, so that they can take part in the celebration. However, says the Braita, ve'ein medaktekin bedavar. We don't scrutinize the matter. We don't go after spying and making sure that they use it for their su'udah. Okay, and yet we have a debate in the Talmud between 2 rabbis. One rabbi says, Rabbi Eliezer says, in the name of Rabbi Meir, and teaches the teaching of Rabbi Meir, that in fact we are scrutinizing. We are going to scrutinize. He says, Migvad Purim lePurim. The Purim collection is meant for Purim. Ve'ein ha'ani rashai likach mehen retzu'ah lesandlo. And a poor person should not take this money even to fix their bootstrap on their strap on their sandal. Think about how, remember, we're talking about a very poor person. If they can't even have shoes, isn't that more important in some ways that they stay warm than having a particularly nice feast? Says the Gemara, we want them to have Purim enjoyment and feasting, just like us. And the only way they could possibly use it for their sandal is if they particularly arranged that beforehand with the tzedakah givers of the city. That is one opinion. That is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. However, says the Talmud, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is lenient. So another rabbi says, no, we're not going to be so careful to make sure that they use it. So we see that there's a little bit of tension in the Talmud here between, ideally, we want the poor person to enjoy Purim, just like us. On the other hand, we'll see that the Jewish law is codified that we are not medaktekin. We're not going to go crazy searching out to make sure that that's how they're using the money. What is the idea behind this, Gemara? What's coming out here? we see that one of the aspects of Matanoth Evionim is empowerment and making and helping the poor uplift them to the point that they feel for that one day, they are just like everyone else, that they do not feel different. They do not feel that they do not feel underprivileged, that they should feel privileged. They should feel empowered and special. We have a very similar idea on Pesach. On Pesach night, anyone who's coming up in Daf Yomi to Arvei Pesachim, very similar idea that we want to empower the poor person at the Seder as well. So here on Purim, there is an element of let's empower this person. It's important that they also sit and eat like a mensch on Purim and enjoy the Seudah as well. That is one idea behind Matanoth Evionim. Another idea is brought out in the Rambam, and this relates to what Rabbanit Oshra had just started to talk about, which is that there is a connection between giving to the poor and simcha. Now, whose simcha are we talking about here? Is it the simcha of the poor person, or is it the simcha for ourselves? And this is something which we're going to see is very much connected. The two are very connected. And the Rambam, Maimonides, says as follows, Mutav l'adam laharbot b'matanoth le'evionim, mi leharbot b'seudato u'b'shiluach manot l're'av. Really interestingly, the Rambam says better, and this has such resonance this year in particular, better to give more to the poor than to spend it on your meal and to spend it on mishloach manot to your friends. She'ein sham simcha gdola umefoara ela l'sameach lev aniim v'yatomim v'almanot v'girim. There is no greater simcha. There is no greater way to experience the mitzvah of simcha than to give to those less fortunate. She'hamesameach lev ha'umlalim ha'elu domeh lashchina. One who provides happiness to those who are despondent, who are poor, who are downtrodden, is like the Shekhinah, is likened to the divine presence. As it says in Yeshayahu, it says, God says, I am to revive the spirit of the humble and put heart into the crushed. For one day a year, we uplift this poor person to take him or her beyond their burdens and give them simcha. But what happens at the same time is that our simcha is enhanced. And this is something which positive psychologists and science has proven, even though they could have looked at the Rambam many years ago to see this, that there's an interesting experiment was done among college students where they were given as an experiment $5, $20 in an envelope. And some of them were told to spend it on themselves, and others were told to spend it on others. And interestingly, some of them listened and some of them didn't. And in the end, what they reported back was, of course, those who took the money and quickly went and spent it on themselves, they stayed neutral. Those who spent the money on others, their happiness level increased significantly. And so we have now modern science to prove what the Rambam already saw, which is that there is great simcha both for the receiver and for the giver. And again, this is part and parcel of the idea that we want to empower and give the person a greater sense of self-confidence and rising above their situation, and hopefully to improve their situation. The Shulchan Aruch, the codification of Jewish law, the later codification of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch codifies a lot of the laws that we've mentioned until now as follows. In Orach Chaim, the Mechaber says as follows: Chayav kol adam liten lefachot shtei matanot l'shnei aniyim. So we saw, based on a Talmud which we didn't see together, which I mentioned, that we give, just as we give 2 mishloach manot, we should give to 2 poor people, not 1, but 2. We want to spread the simcha, spread the empowerment, spread the feeling of Purim. And the Shulchan Aruch codifies our Gemara, as we saw a debate between the rabbis, how much should we scrutinize what's done with the money by the poor. interestingly, the Shulchan Aruch paskins in the more makil approach of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and adds a chidush here. So adds something new. So the Shulchan Aruch says, Ein medaktekin b'ma'ot Purim, we do not scrutinize the money of Purim that's given to the poor. Ella kol mi sheposhet yado litol notnim lo, whoever puts out his or her hand, we give to them. And ubamakom shenahagu liten af akum notnim. And there are even places where there's a custom to give to non-Jews. And where that is the custom, that is encouraged to give, which is an interesting addition to our law. I want to go back for a moment to the top line where it says chayav kol adam. Here we are, it's Torah coming from the Beit Midrash of Matano Sharon and Matan in general. And it is a Beit Midrash of women. Of course, our Torah goes forth to everyone, not just women. But interestingly to note, Chayav Kol Adam, everyone is required in the mitzvah of Matanoth Evionim, men, women, and we also even encourage children to take part, certainly before their bar or bat mitzvah, as an act of education, chinuch. We want to encourage everyone to take part in this mitzvah. The experience enhances their simcha and enhances the simcha of others. And I'd like to close with the Ashkenazi gloss on the Shulchan Aruch, the Rama, Rav Moshe Isserlis, who adds an interesting, nice thought, which caps off some of the ideas we've spoken about, which is that the Rama says, Yesh omrim sheyesh liten kodem Purim machatzit min hamatbeya hakavua be'oto makom ube'oto zman. Okay, so he's saying there's also a minhag on Tanit Esther before Purim begins to give a half shekel or a $50 or a half wherever you are, in memory of, to commemorate the machatzit shekel, the half shekel, which we've been reading about, started to read about in our parshas, in Shabbat Torah reading, the idea that we donate a half shekel to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle. And the idea behind that was that everyone gave. And the idea that everyone gave the same also highlighted the idea that we are each an individual. We each have a place in the Mishkan. We each have a place in today's version of the Mishkan, the Beit Knesset, the community. And by giving, it is symbolic of our place. And by everyone giving the same, it also highlights that really, in essence, nobody is better than anyone else. And at the same time, when we do Matanoth Evionim, we try to do it in a way which does not make the poor feel shamed or embarrassed. We try to do it in a way that makes them feel more uplifted, like a solid human being who is free, who has self-respect, and who can bring simcha to themselves and their family. This year, I'll just say, for those who are in Yerushalayim, Purim falls out on a Friday, so it's a little different and interesting, but the halacha is that we give Matanoth Evionim on the same day that we read Megillah. So for those who find themselves in Jerusalem on Friday, they will be giving Matanoth Evionim on Friday. And in particular, because we are in the time of Corona, this is something which is important to do on Purim itself, Matanoth Evionim. So hopefully no one will find themselves unable to leave their house. But if that is the case, we are blessed with the ability. Rabbi Rimon of the Gush has talked about the ability to give via bits and paybox and all these new amazing technologies, which make it possible to give money so that the poor receive it on Purim Day itself. Which we see is a significant part of the mitzvah. And so I wish you all the ability to take part in this mitzvah to the best of your abilities, and that we really wish everyone lots of success in their parnasa, and everyone who is feeling that they are in need will hopefully be able to get back to feeling more of plenty and simcha. So wishing everyone a Purim Sameach.
Thank you so much, Keren. I wanted to say about Purim and Shulam, you know that Purim and Shulam, you do some of it on Friday and some on Shabbat and some on Sunday. And the first thing you really do after Kriyat Megillah is Matanoth la'aniyim. Like you don't give Mishloach Manot on Friday, but you do give Matanoth la'aniyim on Friday so that the aniyim will be able to have food for Shabbat and food for Sunday. The other thing I wanted to say, that the amazing thing that you brought from the Rambam, that anybody that feels that they need can ask, really has to do with what you were saying about everybody being equal. Because there might be people that don't have a lot but don't need. And there might be people that have more but feel that they need. So everybody should feel like they're a part of the community and can get what they need. Thank you so much, Keren. Rebecca Linzer, without Rebecca, there wouldn't be a group for Morot LaHalacha and the study program in the Beit Midrash. She is part of the staff in Beit Midrash of Matan HaSharon. She's in charge of the global Bat Mitzvah program and in charge of the all two or three programs of the Morot LaHalacha. She has a master's degree in the sciences and is very involved in teaching both in Matan HaSharon and in Oranit, where she lives. She also has a website that helps families bring children the ideas of Chagim and holidays and Yehadut. Rebecca is going to talk about something that I think is amazing. She's going to talk about Mishloach Manot, but connecting it to Beit HaMikdash. You know that all the other holidays have a constant connection to Beit HaMikdash and to Eretz Yisrael, and only Purim theoretically doesn't. But Keren already showed us that Mechatzit shekel is zecher to what we did in the Mikdash, and Rebecca's going to show us other ways that Mishloach Manot can really be connected to the Beit HaMikdash as well. Rebecca, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbanit Batya. I'm very privileged to have Batya as both my teacher and my friend. My topic is Mishloach Manot, and anyone who knows me knows that I love to think of new and creative ideas of what to put in and how to package my Mishloach Manot. But last year, Purim time was different. I frequently find myself returning to the experience of delivering Mishloach Manot last year. It was just a year ago when my husband and I received the names of the families whom we were assigned in the annual Community Mishloach Manot Lottery. Sometimes we receive names of close friends and sometimes complete strangers, and we're always happy to receive names of people we're not close with, as this is the ideal expression of the mitzvah. On Purim morning last year, we arrived at an unfamiliar house to present our Mishloach Manot and were greeted at the door by a woman in a mask, and not a Purim mask. "Oh, we're in quarantine, just leave it by the door." That was our first exposure to what has been a full year of social distancing, lockdowns, and being separated from our loved ones. What's ironic is that the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot was created to combat just this reality. After the victory of the Jews who were saved on Purim, Mordechai and Esther chose several ways to celebrate the new holiday, among them, Mishloach Manot ish l're'ehu, the sending of gifts one to another. Rav Shlomo Alkabetz, who is probably best known as the author of Lecha Dodi, has a work called the Manot Halevi, which is a commentary on Megillat Esther. He actually wrote it as a spiritual Mishloach Manot for his father-in-law. He explains that the idea behind Mishloach Manot is to foster unity between Jews as a direct answer to the statement by Haman that the Jews are Am Echad Mefuzar u'Meforad, one nation dispersed and divided. The giving of Mishloach Manot ensures that every year on Purim, the Jews recreate the sense of unity that their salvation produced. This feeling of connection promotes a sense of responsibility for other Jews. Rav Dessler writes in his book, Mechtav Me'Eliyahu, that the best way to form a relationship is to give. When you give, you develop your Ahavat Yisrael to that other person and eventually to others. One of the many losses we had this year was Rabbi Abraham Twersky. I'd like to share some of his Torah in his memory. One of the statements which he is known for is, "Love is not about what I am going to get, but what I am going to give." People make a mistake in thinking that you give to those whom you love. The real answer is you love those to whom you give. So the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot fosters love between Jews. Therefore, when performing the mitzvah, one should not just perform it perfunctorily, but do it with feeling. One should focus on the qualities of the recipient, think about who they are, in order to feel close to them. The idea is to show honor to the other person and to strengthen his inner joy with this package of Mishloach Manot. In turn, we hope he will pay it forward and share this joy and love with the next Jew. The idea of the Manot Halevi is rooted in a Gemara in Megillah, in Masechet Megillah, Daf Zayin. The Gemara relates that Abaye bar Avin and Rabbi Chanina bar Avin would exchange their meals with each other to fulfill their obligation of sending Mishloach Manot on Purim. This appears at the end of a discussion of Mishloach Manot and what the rabbis of the Gemara would send each other. This simple, humble story tells of two brothers who most likely did not have enough food to both prepare a Suda and send Mishloach Manot, so they each prepared a Suda and then they exchanged it. It's interesting, these brothers always appear together in the Talmud. There's some very nice companionship between them. But Rashi's commentary on this story in the Gemara is not what we would expect. He explains that the fact that they would exchange their meals as Mishloach Manot means that one year, one brother would invite the other, and the next year, they would switch and go to the other brother. This radical interpretation threw the Achronim for a loop. How does this work? It would seem then that only the hosting brother would fulfill his mitzvah of Mishloach Manot, so that the brothers would only be doing the mitzvah every other year. Perhaps they both contributed to the meal? The Bach, Rav Yoel Sirkis, known for his work, the Bayit Chadash, who lived one generation after the Manot Halevi, gives an interesting answer which echoes the thought of the Manot Halevi. The reason for Mishloach Manot, says the Bach, is in order that he be happy and rejoice with his loved ones, and in order that love, fraternity, and friendship be found among them. If he eats with his beloved friend, they will clearly be happy and in good spirits, and therefore they are exempt from Mishloach Manot, and thus will occur in the second year. So we see that they are both fulfilling the mitzvah both years. What the Bach is saying is that the act of eating together fulfills the spirit and the essence of this rabbinic mitzvah of Mishloach Manot. A different and very practical approach is taken by Rav Yisrael Isserlin, the Trumat Hadeshen. He links the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot to the mitzvah of Suda and explains that by sending Mishloach Manot, we ensure that no one will go hungry when it comes time for the Suda. This line of reasoning is supported by the pshat, the plain meaning of the story in Masechet Megillah, where each brother sent his Suda as Mishloach Manot to his brother. We see this as well in the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, where the Mitzvot of Suda and Mishloach Manot appear together in the same paragraph, implying that the two are related. The Rambam writes, how should one fulfill the obligation of a festive meal? He should eat meat and assemble a proper meal according to his means and drink wine until becoming inebriated. And then in the same paragraph, he goes on to say, and similarly, one is obligated to send 2 portions of meat or 2 cooked dishes of 2 types of food to his fellow. So the Rambam clearly implies that the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot stems from the obligation to partake of a festive meal. The Shulchan Aruch rules this way as well. So we have seen 2 reasons for Mishloach Manot: to foster unity and to make sure that everyone has enough food for the Purim Suda. Does it matter what the reason is? In learning Talmud or Halakha, we often discuss the nafkamina, the practical ramifications of a particular debate. Because in the end, we know we have a mitzvah, be it Mishloach Manot or any other mitzvah, and we're going to do the mitzvah because we're obligated to. But by asking the question, what's the nafkamina, what's the practical ramification, the Talmud teaches us that thought, however abstract, can affect practical consequence in the world. While both these interpretations of the mitzvah are admirable, what do we do when they are at odds with each other? Let's return to our 2 points of view. The reasoning of the Manot Halevi and the Bach, that the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot means to foster unity, focuses on the giver, what feelings we want him to have when doing this mitzvah. The reasoning of the Trumat Hadeshen and the Rambam focuses on the recipient. Will he have food for the Suda? Following this line of thought, many questions or conflicts could arise. I'd like to learn some of the practical halachot of Mishloach Manot from this perspective. For example, what is the proper time for sending Mishloach Manot? If the reason is to foster unity, one could say any time could be appropriate. But if it is meant to be used as part of the Suda, it should be given at a time when one could realistically expect that it would be included as part of the Suda food. The Ben Ish Chai discusses the question of someone who sends Mishloach Manot before Purim so that it will be received on Purim. He suggests that according to the Trumat HaDeshen, as long as the recipient benefits from the gift on Purim, the sender has fulfilled his obligation. However, if the mitzvah, according to the Manot HaLevi, is for the sender to feel close to his fellow Jew on Purim, then to fulfill the mitzvah in his time, he must send the Mishloach on the day of Purim itself. Another practical question is the sending of Mishloach Manot between people in walled cities such as Jerusalem, who celebrate Shushan Purim, and non-walled cities who celebrate the regular Purim day. Do you send according to the sender or the recipient? To avoid this issue, according to some authorities, one who lives in Jerusalem and celebrates Shushan Purim should send to people who celebrate Shushan Purim, and one who lives outside the walled cities should send to people who keep the regular Purim. In fact, this year, the question is more interesting. As Rabbanit Batya mentioned, those who are celebrating Shushan Purim have a very unique Purim this year, Purim Mishulash. As regular Purim falls on Friday, Shushan Purim falls out on Shabbat. Since we can't do all the mitzvot of the Chag on Shabbat, they are spread out over 3 days, Friday, Shabbat, and Sunday. On Thursday night and Friday, the Megillah is read in both walled and unwalled cities. In the walled cities, they say Shechianu on the reading of the Megillah, and that Shechianu applies to the mitzvot of all 3 days. Because the Jews of Shushan were still fighting on the day of regular Purim, and we can't celebrate until the fighting is over, the Suda can't take place on Friday when the Megillah is read, and it can't take place on Shabbat, so it gets pushed to Sunday. On Shabbat itself, there's a special reading in the Torah and a Haftarah, and we say Al Anisim, but on Sunday, we have the Suda. So then the question comes up when to do the other 2 mitzvot, Matanoth Evionim and Mishloach Manot. Matanoth Evionim is associated with the Megillah reading and given on Friday, not my mitzvah, so I'll leave it at that. But what about Mishloach Manot? Again, our 2 reasons will have a nafkamina, a practical difference. A 3-day Purim has 3 possible days to give Mishloach Manot, and like in most machlokot, we can find someone who will espouse each possibility. A minority of poskim say to give on Friday because they want to connect it to the Matanoth Evionim. A lone posek, the Maharal Nach, actually says to give Mishloach Manot on Shabbat, which brings with it a host of problems, not the least of which is how to do that in a place where there's no Eruv. But the majority of poskim hold that the Mishloach Manot should be given on Sunday, the day when the Suda is eaten, and which is considered the main day of the festivities. This reinforces the idea that the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot is associated with the Suda. And of course, just to confuse us further, many of the later poskim say to give Mishloach Manot on all 3 days, with the majority given on Sunday, just in case. How about the question of what must one send as Mishloach Manot? The Gemara learns from the pasuk in the Megillah, which says, Mishloach Manot ish l're'ehu, the sending of gifts in the plural, one to another, in the singular, that it means 2 gifts to 1 person. This is the minimum to fulfill the mitzvah. Of course, each adult, men and women, has to give to at least 1 person. So a couple must give a minimum of 2, and a family in which there are children over the age of bar or bat mitzvah must give accordingly. What gifts qualify for this obligation? This is where our question may arise. We saw that the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch as well write that one should send 2 portions of meat or 2 cooked dishes of 2 types of food. Some write that the food must already be cooked and ready to eat, while others maintain that one may even send uncooked food. The Mishnah Berurah cites both opinions. Seemingly, those who relate the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot to the festive Purim meal might require that the food be ready to eat. By the way, there's no source for the common misconception that one must send 2 foods requiring 2 different brachot. The 2 foods need to be distinct and not 2 pieces of the same food, but there's no requirement of brachot. Rabbi Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg, in his Tzitz Eliezer, suggests that our debate may also impact upon the content of what we send, the size or the importance of the gift. He suggests that according to the Trumat HaDeshen, the giver should take into account the financial position of the recipient and whether he will potentially use the gift for his Purim meal. A person who's accustomed to eating fancy food would not eat plain food at the Suda. What about if the person is vegetarian or celiac or diabetic? Harav Neuvert, the author of Shmirat Shabbat Kehilchata, rules that one does not fulfill his obligation with Mishloach Manot that the recipient cannot partake of. One should adapt what they are giving so that the food one is sending is appropriate to the recipient. This would appear to support the idea of the Trumat HaDeshen that the mitzvah is about the recipient and not the sender. However, according to the Manot HaLevi, the gift should reflect the position of the giver in order to properly reflect his gesture of affection towards the recipient, so that if the person sending the Mishloach Manot is a gourmet, he should not give food he would not eat. If he appreciates good wine, he should not send a bottle he himself wouldn't drink. Another aspect of the mitzvah is affected by our machloket, sending by a messenger. The pasuk says, "Mishloach manot ish l're'ehu," the sending of portions one to another. It doesn't say the giving of portions one to another, it says the sending. And based on this, it has been said that it's actually preferable to send the mishloach manot through a messenger, a shaliach. The purpose of employing an agent here is not to discharge one's obligation, but rather to get more people involved in the mitzvah. This idea seemingly supports the notion that Mishloach Manot serves to increase peace and harmony among the Jewish people and should therefore include as many people as possible. This idea of sending through a messenger is particularly relevant this year with Corona, where there are people who can't leave their homes to deliver the Mishloach Manot personally. The Ktav Sofer asks, if the recipient doesn't know who the Mishloach Manot comes from, does the sender fulfill the mitzvah? According to Trumat HaDeshen, he would, as the sender has ensured that the recipient has food for the Suda. But according to the Manot HaLevi, we have not created any personal connections if we don't know who it came from. So we have seen many nafkaminot, practical differences between the opinion of the Manot HaLevi that Mishloach Manot is to foster love between fellow Jews, and the opinion of the Trumat HaDeshen that Mishloach Manot is to ensure that no one is without food for the Suda. In the end, the ideal is to cover both of these opinions. A person who wholeheartedly gives Mishloach Manot while putting thought into who the recipient is fulfilling the mitzvah in the best possible way. In order to do that, at least one Mishloach Manot should be of proper Suda type food. But remember that you can include the food you serve to a guest at your Suda or that you bring as a guest to another Suda as part of your Mishloach Manot. I'd like to finish with a beautiful thought from the Yudit Samad, Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, which I think follows on the thought of the Manot HaLevi. He was asked why one does not recite a bracha on the commandment to perform this mitzvah. In his answer, he states that while the accepted rule regarding mitzvot is that it's greater to be commanded and do the mitzvah than to do it without being commanded, when it comes to the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot, this is not the case. In the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot, the very choice to give something of one's own free will is what creates this feeling of connection and love. If people only give because they were commanded to, it minimizes that purpose. The Yudit Samad concludes his response with this thought. He writes, another novel idea I have is that Mishloach Manot is fundamentally a mitzvah that applies throughout the entire year. And at Purim, we are commanded to fulfill it actively in order to remember it throughout the year, as is the case with reading Parshat Zachor, which we recite once so as to remember throughout the year. Purim is a time when we are reminded to reach out to our fellow Jew to show our appreciation and love for them. This reminder is meant to reinforce a thought that should be present throughout the year. This year, we have been dispersed and divided. Grandparents did not see grandchildren. Smachot were celebrated in the absence of close family. Lahavdil Avelim sat Shiva virtually. We focused inward. With the help of God, we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. It's time to return to the community safely. May the Mishloach Manot we bring this year reunite us, and may we continue performing this mitzvah throughout the year with feelings of love and responsibility for one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I teach my students when they start learning in the Beit Midrash that the Trumat Hadeshen wrote his own questions. And it's very interesting to see what he wanted to teach us by writing his own questions. And I think here he would totally agree with you, Rebecca, that it's time to go back to the community and look outwards. Thank you very, very much. Yudit is going to talk about Seudat Purim, about the minhag and the halacha of Pores Mapa. I'm sure she'll explain to you what that means. I'm just wanted to share that it's a mitzvah in Hilchot Shabbat and not in Hilchot Purim. And we get to do it this year because Purim is on Friday. Yehudit is a graduate of both our NIDA program and our Shabbat program. She has a degree in law and finance from London University. She is the halachic advisor of the Beit Knesset Lechu Neranana, and she teaches halacha for groups in Matano Sharon. Yudit, bevakasha.
Thank you so much. I'd like to start by taking the opportunity to thank Matan for providing us with courses to learn halacha on such a high level. It really is a joy to us. And of course, thank you for the opportunity tonight to share some of the Torah in the run-up to Purim. Good evening, everyone. Purim is fast approaching, and we are all busy planning the mitzvot of the day, including the Mishteh, the Seudat Purim, which is a central aspect of the day of Purim. The Mishteh is a mitzvah that is perhaps less focused on giving to others than the two previous mitzvot which have been discussed this evening. In some ways, it is difficult to see how we should best add meaning to our Mishteh, to our Purim Seudah. This year, when Purim falls on a Friday, an interesting practical question arises as to when we should arrange our Purim Seudah. The Ramah writes, the general custom is to conduct our Purim Seudah in the afternoon, and that one should ensure that the majority of the meal is eaten before the end of the day of Purim. However, when Purim falls on Friday, the Ramah rules that one should arrange the Purim Seudah in the morning. This ruling is based on the Sefer HaMinhagim, where Rav Terna says that when Purim falls on Friday, we should have our Mishteh in the morning, because one should not arrange a Seudah between Mincha and Ma'ariv on Erev Shabbat. The fear here is that we will ignore Kavod Shabbat, because we will come into Shabbat without an appetite and without having properly prepared for Shabbat. The Mishnah Berurah agrees and says that one should start the Mishteh ideally before Chatzot on Friday. However, there are many authorities who allow starting the Mishteh in the afternoon. So let us explore this lesser well-known option. The first Mishnah in Arvei Psachim states that on Erev Pesach, one should refrain from eating from around Mincha time until it gets dark. The Gemara asks, why is this statement made solely with regard to Erev Pesach? We know from a Braita that on every Erev Yom Tov and Erev Shabbat, one should not eat from Mincha onwards, so that we enter Shabbat with an appetite. There is a machloket on this point between Rav Yehuda and Rav Yossi. Rav Yehuda says one must stop the meal, whereas Rav Yossi says one may carry on during this time period. Practically speaking, Rav Yehuda requires one to make Kiddush immediately upon Knisat Shabbat, whereas Rav Yossi would allow the meal to continue, and after its conclusion, one should bench, and then one would make Kiddush on Kos Yain. So according to Rav Yossi, there is no problem on every Erev Shabbat to eat from Mincha onwards, and it is only on Erev Pesach that it is forbidden because of the chiyuv of achilat matzah. But the Amora Shmuel says halacha is neither like Rav Yehuda nor like Rav Yossi. Rather, we are pores mapa umekadesh. What is pores mapa umekadesh? The idea is, as soon as Shabbat enters, we spread a cover over the bread and then make kiddush. And then one may continue the meal and bench at its conclusion. So according to Shmuel, who according to the Yerushalmi is bringing the opinion of the Chachamim, there is no need to stop the meal, as Rav Yehuda requires, but one makes kiddush immediately upon Knisat Shabbat, unlike Rav Yossi, who allows the kiddush to be delayed. Pores mapa or mekadesh is a concept found in any ordinary Shabbat meal which we commence after Knisat Shabbat. Ideally, one should make kiddush before bringing the bread to the table. But if it is already there, then we spread a mapa, we cover the bread, and then make kiddush, as is the common custom nowadays. In the situation of a meal which began on Erev Shabbat and continues into Leil Shabbat, the Pores Mapa or Mekadesh serves to draw a line between the Seudat Chol and the Seudat Shabbat. And the Kiddush grants the Kedushat Hayom and adds meaning to the meal as it is now Seudat Shabbat. There is a machloket Rishonim as to whether one must wash hands and make the bracha hamotzi again after this Kiddush. Those who hold that there is a need to do so view the Pores Mapa or Mekadesh as a break in the meal, as a hesech hadat, and therefore require washing netilat yadayim and making hamotzi again. Those who rule that this is not required believe that although the Pores Mapa or Mekadesh and the Kiddush changed the status of the meal from Seudat Chol to Seudat Shabbat, there was no hesech hadat. We made Kiddush merely as fulfilling the chiyuv of Kiddush, which is incumbent upon us at the moment of Knisat Shabbat. Just as the benching, which comes at the end of the meal, relates to the entirety of the meal, so too the netilat yadayim and hamotzi from the beginning of the meal is valid for the second half of the meal, just as it was at the start. All opinions agree that the benching made at the end of such a meal should include ritzei. The question is, should we include al-hanissim in this benching? The Meiri writes that in such a situation, one should include al-hanissim, since the 15th of Adar is also a day of simcha. The Magen Avraham explains that the answer depends on whether one has davened Arvit Shal Shabbat or not. If one has not yet davened, then one includes al-hanissim. But if one has already davened Arvit Shal Shabbat, then one should not say al-hanissim. So to avoid problems, the Magen Avraham prescribes eating and then benching with ritzei and al-hanissim, and after that, davening Arvit with a minyan. However, it is hard to understand why the decision should be dependent on whether one has davened Arvit Shal Shabbat or not. After all, we have already made Kiddush, which is being Makadesh Hayom, and therefore that should surely be a good enough reason to exclude the al-hanissim upon this logic. The Chaya Adam brings a different opinion. He says that although usually when we conclude a Purim Seudah well after the day of Purim is finished, we do include al-hanissim, in such a situation when we continue our Seudat Purim into Leil Shabbat, one should not include al-hanissim in the benching because it already contains ritzei, and there is an inherent contradiction between the two. It is either Shabbat or Purim. The Mishnah Berurah quotes the Chaya Adam and confirms that on Leil Shabbat, even if one has not yet davened Arvit Shel Shabbat, one should include Al Hanissim in benching. One should not include Al Hanissim in the benching. So to summarize, if one prefers to arrange their mishteh, their Seudat Purim, the afternoon of Friday, one should do so according to the principle of Pares, Mapa, Umekadesh. One should daven Mincha first and then start the meal, ideally 3 hours before Shkia. One should try not to overeat in the first part of the meal so that we enter Shabbat with an appetite to eat in the Seudat Shabbat as well. Bearing in mind the fear we mentioned of compromising on the Kavod Shabbat. Anytime from Plag HaMincha onwards, one should accept, preferably verbally, Shabbat upon themselves. But of course, the person who will light the Shabbat candles should not accept Shabbat before they have lit the candles. Then one makes Kiddush upon Knisat Shabbat, but we exclude the bracha of Berei Pri Hagafen if that has already been made during the Mishteh. We bring 2 chalot to the table and share the bread around, again without an additional hamotzi if hamotzi has already been made. The benching at the end of such a meal includes ritzei, but not al hanissim. Mariv should be davened ideally with a minyan. We have thus far set out 2 possibilities of when one could plan their mishteh, their Purim Seudah this year on Friday. Each of us can choose which one best suits their nuclear family and which will allow for the greatest Kavod Shabbat and Simchat Purim. We have seen that Kavod Shabbat has both positive and negative halachic implications, both active and passive obligations. One must actively prepare for Shabbat, but one must also avoid entering Shabbat without a sufficient appetite for the Seudat Shabbat. Similarly, Simchat Purim may incorporate both positive and negative halachic aspects. So let's turn to the original source for Simchat Purim so that we can explore this idea a little further. The psukim in the Megillah that mention the Simcha of Purim are found in Perek Tet, and the pasuk says, Al Ken HaYehudim HaPrazim, the Jews who lived in the unwalled cities, Osim et Yom 14 LaChodesh Adar Simcha Umishteh V'Yom Tov. They made this day, the 14th of Adar, into a day of Simcha, of Mishteh, of feasting, and of Yom Tov. The Gemara in Megillah learns from these 3, Simcha, Mishteh, and Yom Tov, 3 different rules. The Gemara learns from Simcha the Isur of Hesped. We should not make a eulogy. The Gemara learns from Mishteh the Isur of Ta'anit. One should not fast. And the Gemara learns from Yom Tov the Isur of Melacha. We know that they did not accept upon themselves the Yom Tov. This is seen in the psukim, a few psukim later. The wording is, La'asot otam yemei mishteh v'simcha. Yemei mishteh v'simcha, the absence of Yom Tov is clear. However, this is not the only difference. The order has also been changed. Yemei mishteh first, v'simcha second. The simcha, which was perhaps originally simchat hayom, like simchat Yom Tov, is now intrinsically linked to the mishteh. The simcha is a chiyuv in the mishteh and is fulfilled only at the time of Seudat Purim. The Shulchan Aruch seems to hold this view. He rules that our custom is to perform acts of Avelut on Purim, seemingly because he sees no contradiction between Avelut and Simcha, because there is no Simcha in all of the day. He also rules that one can get married on Purim. The Magen Avraham challenges this and says, but we know, Ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha, we don't mix one type of simcha with another. However, If the Shulchan Aruch does not consider the Simcha on Purim to rest on the entire day, then he has no problem of mixing two different types of Simcha. The Ramah, however, does not appear to hold of this view, that Simchat Purim is solely related to the Mishteh itself. He says that although one does not, excuse me, he says that although one does not fulfill the mitzvah of Mishteh at night, one should have more food and be happy on the night of Purim too. He also states the custom of wearing Shabbat and Yom Tov clothes on Purim, suggesting again that the whole day is one of Simcha. Finally, the Ramah rules that there is no Avelut on Purim, since it is in stark contrast to the Simcha of the day, and it is simply not congruent. Apparently, there are two separate chiyuvim of Simcha, one that is intrinsically linked to the Mishteh, and the other which is a mitzvah of Simcha in the whole day of Purim. If the Ramah holds that there are two types of Simcha, one of which is associated with the entire day of Purim, then why did he not comment on the Shulchan Aruch's ruling that one may get married on Purim? After all, we would expect him to argue, like the Magen Avraham, that one can't get married on Purim because of Ein Ma'arvin, Simcha b'Simcha. Don't mix two types of Simcha. However, the Simcha on Purim is different from Simchat Yom Tov, where we are instructed, V'samachta b'chagecha. You should rejoice in the day itself and not in anything else. The Simcha of Purim is able to be fulfilled by anything which brings joy. For example, a wedding, which would make for a very joyful day. This Simcha, I would like to emphasize, is associated with both the 14th and the 15th of Adar. The Ramah, when he rules that one should not practice Avelut on Purim, rules thus for both the 14th and the 15th of Adar. There is the Isur of Hesped, of eulogy, and of Tanit, of fasting, on both the 14th and the 15th of Adar. So although the people in unwalled cities perform their mitzvot of Purim on the 14th of Adar, and the people who live in walled cities carry out their mitzvot on the 15th of Adar, both these days are days of Simcha for all Jews wherever they may live. However, there is a qualitative difference between the two types of Simcha. The Simcha on both of these days is of Shev V'al Ta'aseh, a passive type of Simcha. We should not make a eulogy or fast. Whereas the Simcha, which is particular to the Mishteh of Purim, is one of Kum V'aseh. It is active. There is a chiyuv incumbent upon each one of us to make a Mishteh on Purim and to fill it with Simcha. And I wish all of you much hatzlacha doing this. Enjoy, and Purim Sameach to you all.
Thank you, Yehudit. That was a very informative. I can say that as a woman, I think that it might give us more simcha to only have one seudah and to do pores maka. I just want to remind you all that the person that says Kiddush should not be drunk. One of the reasons for saying Tfilat Arvit after the Suda is to let the wine settle so people aren't drunk while they're davening. Thank you so much. That was very, very interesting. We're going to hear from Elisheva now on a very interesting topic. You know that we say that you have to hear every word from a person who is reading from a kosher Megillah. That, as a child, really was a big thing for me because there was so much noise in Beit Knesset, especially around Haman, that I was never sure I got each and every single word. My daughter was born Untitled Chapter, and since she was born, I decided to do a Megillah reading for women here. So for the past 18 years, I can hear every word anyway, because women, Baruch Hashem, make much kinder noise than what was in the shows before, but still, I think that it's a very important topic. Thank you for sharing it with us. Elisheva Ausubel grew up in Rochester, New York. She made Aliyah about 6 years ago. She is a philosophy and Jewish studies major in Yeshiva University. She teaches in Midrashot in Israel, and she finished the Morot LaHalacha course in the second cycle that finished last year. Bevakasha.
Good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here and to learn with all of you. Or, 3/4 of the way through the TED Talk evening. This is about the point during the Kriyat Megillah where I find myself starting to nod off, and especially if I've been fasting that day. So this is definitely the challenge of Kriyat Megillah, keeping ourselves alert throughout the whole thing so that we can hear every word that, as Batya already mentioned. I'm going to be focusing and talking about that halacha. Although now, after listening to Yudit, I'm not sure which is more challenging, hearing every word of the Megillah or trying to start a Suda before Shabbat, hours before Shabbat, but still have an appetite when Shabbat comes in. That might win. Be that as it may, the Gemara, when it's talking about, it lists all of the Svarim and Ketuvim in Tanakh, Torah and Vim Ketuvim. So when it gives the list of all the books of Ketuvim, it only calls one of those books a Megillah, and that is Megillat Esther. We're very used to thinking about the 5 Megillot, Chamesh Megillot. We know we read Megillot other times. But what distinguishes Megillat Esther and why it's the only one the Gemara actually calls it Megillah is because Megillat Esther is the only one which is a chiyuv, obligatory. All the other Megillot that we read, Megillat Ruth and Shavuot and Shir Hashirim and Kohelet, all the other Megillot are a minhag, they're a custom, and in fact there are Sfaradi communities which don't have the custom to read those Megillot on Chagim. Megillat Esther, however, is a chiyuv, not just once, but twice, evening and morning. Men and women, we are all obligated to read, or by extension to hear, to listen to the Megillah. And unlike other Chagim, where, let's say, Megillat Ruth, if you go to a shul and they have a Megillah, a scroll of Ruth, and they read it from a scroll, beautiful, wonderful. But if they don't, that's also fine. You could just pick up any Chumash and you can just read Megillat Ruth from a Chumash. Megillat Esther, however, it has to be a Megillah, as Batya mentioned. You have to read it from a kosher Megillah, otherwise you did not fulfill your obligation. Similar to Kriyat Torah on Shabbat, right? You have to read the parsha from the Sefer Torah. And in fact, the Mishnah in Masechet Megillah, the second parak, starts off saying, Kar'a al peh, if you read the story of Esther by heart, or let's say from a printed book, lo yatsa, you did not fulfill your obligation. You have to read it or hear it being read from a scroll. And also, like Torah reading, we're very careful that each word is read correctly without any mistakes. If a mistake is made, the Baal Koreh goes back and fixes it. But there's the extra challenge of the Megillah, as we mentioned, that we don't have on Shabbat, and that is that we have to hear every single word of the Megillah, and the Mishnah Berurah actually codifies if the Baal Koreh, let's say, misses even one letter or a word, then if we missed it entirely, or the Baal Koreh missed it, then you're not Yotze. So this presents a very big challenge. When I hear this halacha, it sounds so demanding. I can't help but thinking, talk about religion being fertile ground for OCD. This is such a demanding halacha that we have to hear every single word. What is the solution? What does that mean? So you come, you hear every word, and then the last pasuk, you miss a word, you have to hear it all over again. So Baruch Hashem, there is a much easier solution. If you miss one word when your kid is talking to you, or there's some grogger shaking happy kid right behind you and you miss a word, or you come a second late to shul, which has happened to me twice. The most embarrassing part of that is that at the time I was living across the street from the shul. But be that as it may, there is a solution. The Gemara actually explains that yes, you have to hear the Megillah being, the story of Esther, Megillat Esther, being read from a kosher Megillah. However, the halacha is you have to hear most of the Megillah read from a kosher scroll. But you can hear or read up to half of the Megillah by heart or from a printed book like we have nowadays. So practically, if you miss a word, if the kid next to you is shaking their grogger for too long, or you nod off for a second, or whatever, there's a very easy way to solve that. You just need to look inside your printed Megillah and read, catch up what you missed, and catch up to the Baal Koreh. Now, sometimes that's easier said than done, because the Baal Koreh sometimes reads very quickly. It's not so easy. And the other halacha that the same Mishnah talks about is that you have to read the Megillah in order. You can't skip around. HaKoreh lemafreya lo yatsa. Meaning, let's say I come late to shul and I miss the first two psukim. So can I just sit down, listen to the Baal Koreh, and at the end of the Megillah, I just flip back, I go back and I read those two psukim at the end? No, that doesn't work, says the Mishnah. It has to be read in order. So if we miss a word, we have to say it and say the rest of the pasuk in order, say everything in order until we catch up to the Baal Koreh. Why is it that every Shabbat, when we hear Kriyat HaTorah, we don't have this demanding halacha that we have to hear every single word? We don't have this, stress and anxiety. Did I get it? Did I hear it? Did I miss it? Am I Yotze? Am I not Yotze? Do I need to go to another reading? Did I read it inside myself? But on Purim we do. So the technical halachic answer is that Kriyat HaTorah every Shabbat is a chiyuv on the tzibur, on the entire community. So even if I missed the word, the tzibur, the community as a collective, heard all of the words being read from the Torah, and so that's good, that's fine. But when it comes to Megillah, this is a chiyuv on each and every individual. It's a chiyuv on the yachid. It's a personal obligation. So if I didn't personally hear every single word, then I was not Yotze. In addition to this, the halachic technical answer, I wanted to explore and try to think about, is there also a deeper conceptual message perhaps that underlies these two halachot? The halacha that I have to read the entire Megillah in order, and two, I have to hear every single word, or if I miss a word, I just have to catch it up, make it up myself. And I wanted to share an idea with you from Rabbi Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, that I think really ties in and helps us understand these two halachot. The Gemara asks, where do we have a hint to Esther from the Torah? And the Gemara chooses the pasuk which says Haster Astir Panai, the pasuk in the Torah which says that God says, I will hide my face. And of course, it is a word play on the word astir, which sounds like Esther. But in addition, this is also, of course, the theme of Purim. The story of Purim is a story where God is hidden. So this really gets to the essence of the day. And as Batya mentions, Purim is the only Chag in the Jewish calendar that is set entirely in Galut. Every other Chag is either based on something that happens in Israel or on the way to Eretz Yisrael. Purim alone is set in a place of Hester Panim, outside of Eretz Yisrael, Galut, where it is harder to feel Hashem's presence. And of course, we know that is why the Megillah does not mention Hashem's name at all. And in fact, goes to almost absurd lengths to leave out Hashem's name. This a good example of that as the pasuk actually that Oshra began with, that Oshra quoted at the beginning. Mordechai, when he makes his emphatic plea to Esther to do something on behalf of the Jewish people, he says, Im hacharesh tacharishi ba'et hazot. If you, Esther, are silent at this time, revach v'hatzala ya'amod ha'yehudi mimakom acher. Salvation for the Jewish people will come from another place. What do you mean from another place? What is this other place? Of course, it's a reference to Hashem. And in fact, even makom is a kinoi for Hashem, is like a nickname for Hashem, so to speak. But the Megillah goes to such great lengths to leave Hashem's name out that it says, mimakom acher. There's no direct mention of God because the whole Purim story, the story of Galut, is a story where God is hidden. And yet in this very same pasuk, where God is specifically not mentioned, then he's deleted. This, says Rabbi Sachs, is like the ultimate statement of hashgacha pratit, of divine providence. The belief, as Oshra mentioned, that we each have a mission, that wherever we are, sometimes Hashem is asking us to realize why he put us here. In this time, in this place, with these dangers, with these challenges, and with these talents. Hashgacha pratit is our fundamental belief that Hashem never abandons us, that he puts us here with something to do. There are two words actually in Hebrew which sound very similar but have total opposite meanings. Those two words are mikre with a hey at the end and mikra with an aleph at the end. Mikre with a hey means random, happened by accident, no divine providence. But mikra with an aleph at the end means a calling from God with a specific task to that individual. We know the third book of the Torah is called Sefer Vayikra. And if you look in a Sefer Torah, that word, Vayikra, is written with a small aleph. And Rabbi Sachs asks why. Why is that aleph, which is a silent letter, written small? To teach us, he writes, that sometimes it can be very hard to hear Hashem's call. Sometimes it's even a silent call. But even in the worst Hester Panim, Hashem is always calling on us to do something. There's an interesting, curious historical fact for those who like history, that in the classical Greek period, which is around 4th, 5th century BCE, around actually the time of the Purim story, they rejected the form of writing with spaces in between words. And instead they adopted a form of writing called scripta continua, which is that not only is there no punctuation at all in the text, but there's not even any spaces in between words. And historians point out that in that time period, reading had a very different purpose than it does today. Today we read to quickly gain knowledge, to learn more information. But then a text in front of you was a memory tool. You had to practice the text many times before reading it out loud so that you'd know where to put the spaces in. And so reading was an act of memory, which should, bring to mind, it certainly resembles our experience of reading from a Sefer Torah or a Megillah. It requires a lot of practice in advance. And the text in front of you is a memory tool to just give you that extra cue. So the historian, I'm going to share my screen with you here, the historian Jocelyn Small pointed out that if you look at this word in scripta continua, curious how you read it. So let me share my screen with you. Oh. Let's try that again. Let me share my screen with you here. I'm not sure if you're seeing what I'm clicking on. Do people see God is nowhere?
רואים, אבל עכשיו זה ירד.
מה?
ראינו לשנייה את המצגת והיא ירדה חזרה.
עוד פעם ננסה, ואם לא, if I don't succeed, then we'll move on. Okay. Do you see a word? רואים?
רואים.
This word is very, very different based on where you put the space in. You can either read it as God is nowhere, or it can be read as God is now here. And this is exactly the message of the Megillah. God is nowhere mentioned, and yet God is everywhere. God is in every column. In fact, the minhag has developed that every column of the scroll of the cloth, we write where we start the column with Hamelech. God is absent, and yet he's there at every corner, at the starting of every page. He's nowhere mentioned, but yet he's everywhere. And so the Megillah teaches us not just to remember the story of Purim, but it's a lesson in how to remember. It's a lesson in how to tell our story as well. Even when there is no miracle, even when it's just the regular ups and downs of life, of politics, of economics, we can still tell our story in a way where God's guiding hand is crystal clear. And I think that the halachot, to both hear the Megillah in order and to hear every word, underscores this very idea. Because if we would read about Bigtan and Teresh at the end of the Megillah, we fail to appreciate how Hashem choreographed each and every step with the exact perfect timing to fit his ultimate plan. That sequence of the events, the ordering of the events is critical. By reading the Megillah in order, even though God's name is not once mentioned, it is crystal clear who is pulling the strings. And likewise, the halacha to hear every pasuk, every word, and to make it up on our own if we miss it by just reading inside our own printed Megillah, highlights the theological message of the book. that even when God is hidden, he is calling on us. It may be a silent call. It may be hidden in that small aleph or in the little details of life. But if we are paying close attention to every word, we just might hear that silent call of Umi Yodea im la'et kazot higat lamalchut. Perhaps it was for this moment that I was placed here on this earth. Chag Sameach to everybody, and wishing you a freilich and Purim.
Thank you so much. Wow. טוב, אז מי יודע אם לעת כזאת הגעת למלכות? I think that us as Morot LaHalacha, we came into history now, right now, which is the exact meduyak time when the Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to be here and give our new and exciting and our women's look on halacha and Torah. And thank you so much for teaching us today. And thank you, Rabbanit Oshra and Matano Sharon and Matan Bichlal for letting us learn in the Beit Midrash and opening the worlds of Torah and halacha. And I hope you all have a very, very happy Purim.